Okay, so have you ever felt like, you should be better at worship, but you're not even sure what that means?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those churchy words that just sounds good, but like, what do you actually do?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way.
So let's dive into the story of the Magi today.
Okay.
You know those mysterious guys who followed a star to find baby Jesus?
Right.
We've got this fascinating excerpt here.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, like, what if their journey can actually, like, unlock for us a new perspective on what worship really means?
That's a great idea, and I think I think the Magi story is a good one for that.
Something we can actually, like, apply to our lives, not just admire from afar.
Yeah, and it's a surprisingly deep well to draw from.
Right.
You know what's interesting is that these weren't just random travelers.
Yeah. Right.
The text hints that they were probably respected scholars, maybe even astrologers.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I kind of just assumed they were, like, wandering mystics.
I think that's the common picture.
Yeah.
But if we look at the historical context, it's more likely that they were a part of a scholarly tradition.
Huh.
And that makes their actions even more intriguing.
Like, why would these respected intellectuals drop everything to follow a star?
Right. What made this celestial event different from all the others they'd observed?
Yeah, was it just the star itself, or is there something more?
Well, remember, the source material emphasizes that worship is our response to God's revelation.
Okay.
Now, the star was definitely a visual cue, but it was likely connected to something deeper.
Okay.
Prophecy.
Oh, right. The Old Testament prophecies. I remember something about a star and a coming king.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There are several prophecies that could be linked to the star, including Isaiah 60.6,
Okay.
which talks about nations coming to the light and kings to the brightness of dawn.
Oh, wow.
If the Magi were scholars of their time, they would have been familiar with these texts.
So the star wasn't just like a random phenomenon. It was like a confirmation of what they already knew or anticipated. And that's what propelled them on this crazy journey.
It seems that way.
Wow.
They didn't just stumble upon a star and say, let's go on an adventure.
Right.
This was a deliberate response
Yeah.
to something they recognized as a divine sign.
Okay. That makes their commitment even more impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not talking about a quick trip to the next town over.
Right.
The journey from the east to Bethlehem would have been long and arduous, maybe even dangerous.
Absolutely. Their journey was more than just physical. It was a spiritual quest.
Right.
Each step they took was a step closer to the truth they were seeking. A truth that was literally embodied in the newborn king.
That makes me think about like the sacrifices we make for our faith today.
Yeah.
Are we willing to step outside our comfort zones to like put in the effort to seek truth and encounter God in deeper ways?
That's a powerful question, and one that we should all ask ourselves. Yeah. The Magi's journey reminds us that true worship often involves a willingness to go the extra mile, to push past our doubts and fears, and to follow where God leads.
So they finally arrive in Bethlehem, probably exhausted from their travels.
Okay.
And then they find baby Jesus, not exactly the majestic entrance I'd expect for a king.
Right, such a striking contrast, these wise men, these seekers of knowledge humbling themselves before an infant.
Yeah.
And what do? They bowed down and worshiped him.
I've always loved that image. It speaks volumes about their humility and their recognition that this seemingly ordinary baby was something truly extraordinary.
Exactly. They saw beyond the humble surroundings,
Yeah.
beyond the outward appearance,
Right.
and recognized the divine kingship present in this child. That's true worship, seeing beyond the surface and responding to the deeper reality.
And then there's the whole thing with the gifts.
Yes.
Gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
Right.
Each one loaded with symbolism.
Yeah.
I always thought it was just about bringing nice presents, but there's clearly more to it.
Oh, absolutely. Each gift is a powerful symbol, almost like a theological statement. Gold, of course, represents kingship, acknowledging Jesus as the King of Kings. Frankincense, used in religious ceremonies, points to his divine nature.
Yeah.
But the myrrh, that one's always struck me.
It's kind of a downer, right?
Yeah.
Isn't myrrh used for, well, embalming?
You're right.
Not exactly festive.
It was used in burial preparations.
Right.
And in this context, it foreshadows something profound.
Okay.
Jesus' ultimate sacrifice on the cross.
Whoa, so even in this moment of joyful worship, there's a hint of the suffering to come.
Yeah.
It's like the myrrh adds this whole other layer of meaning to their worship, acknowledging that following Jesus isn't just about joy and celebration, but also out sacrifice.
Exactly. It's almost like they're saying, we recognize you as king, as God, but we also acknowledge the cost of that kingship. The path of suffering you will walk.
That's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah.
But it also begs the question, what does all of this, the start, the journey, the gifts, the worship, teach us about what worship really is?
That's the heart of it, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
And the source material hits the nail on the head. Worship is our response to God's revelation.
Okay, so the Magi were responding to... Hold on, let me think this through. They were responding to the revelation of Jesus as the Messiah, right?
Yes.
The prophecies, their journey, it all culminated in this incredible moment of recognizing and adoring him.
Precisely. Their worship was a direct and tangible outpouring of their awe, their gratitude, and their surrender to the reality of who Jesus was.
Wow.
It wasn't just an idea, it was an experience.
So how do we apply this to our own lives?
Right.
Does it mean we have to wait for some huge star-in-the-sky moment to experience true worship?
Yeah, that's where things get really interesting. Revelation doesn't always have to be some grand, earth-shattering event.
Okay.
Think of it like this. The Magi had been studying the stars their whole lives, but it took this one particular star appearing at this particular time to trigger that aha moment for them.
Okay, so it was about recognizing the significance of something they were already familiar with, seeing it in a new light.
Exactly, and I think that's true for us as well. God often reveals himself in the everyday, the seemingly ordinary moments of our lives. It's about paying attention, being open to those subtle whispers of grace that we might otherwise miss.
That's kind of a relief, to be honest. I mean, I'm not exactly waiting for a star to appear over my house.
Right.
But it makes me wonder, what does that everyday revelation look like? How do we even know we're experiencing it?
It's different for everyone, but it often starts with a shift in perspective.
Okay.
It's about noticing the beauty in the mundane, the hand of God at work in the details of our lives.
Okay, give me an example. What kind of details are we talking about?
Think about it, a moment of unexpected connection with a stranger.
Okay.
A sudden insight that helps you solve a problem. A feeling of peace that washes over you in the midst of chaos.
Okay.
These can all be glimpses of God's presence, little star moments if we're open to seeing them that way.
So it's not necessarily about supernatural events or dramatic pronouncements from the sky. It's about tuning in to those subtle frequencies, those little nudges from the divine that are already present in our lives.
Exactly. And the source material points us to three key elements that can help us cultivate that kind of attentiveness, that posture of worshipful awareness.
Okay, all ears, lay them on me.
All right, so the first element is trusting in the provision of Jesus. It's about recognizing that everything we have, our talents, our resources, even our very breath, is a gift from God.
Okay, trusting in Jesus' provision, but doesn't that sound a bit passive?
Yeah.
Like just sit back and wait for God to hand us everything we need.
It's not about being passive. It's about surrender. It's about recognizing our dependence on God and trusting that He will provide for us, not necessarily according to our own plans and timelines, but according to His perfect will.
So it's more about aligning our will with His will, letting go of the need to control every outcome.
Exactly. When we truly trust in God's provision, we're free to live with a sense of gratitude and abundance, even when things don't go according to plan.
Right.
We can rest in the knowledge that He is working all things together for our good.
I can see how that ties into worship when we're focused on what we lack. It's easy to become anxious and fearful. But when we recognize God's provision in our lives, it naturally leads to a sense of gratitude and a desire to express that gratitude through worship.
That's a great point. It shifts our focus from scarcity to abundance, from fear to faith, and that shift opens our hearts to experience the joy of worship.
Okay, what's the second element?
The second element is focusing on Christ and Christ alone.
That sounds pretty straightforward. But honestly, in our world of constant distractions and information overload, staying focused on anything, let alone Christ, feels like a Herculean effort.
You're not wrong. It takes intentionality.
Yeah.
A conscious choice to make Christ the center of our life.
Yeah.
Not just in theory, but in practice. It's about filtering out the noise and making space for Him.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? I mean, I can't exactly live in a monastery and avoid the world completely.
It doesn't have to be about extreme measures. It's about those small, everyday choices.
Yeah.
Prioritizing time for prayer and reflection. Choosing media that nourishes our souls instead of draining them. Surrounding ourselves with people who encourage our faith.
So it's about being mindful of where we're directing our attention, our energy, our time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like those noise-canceling headphones, blocking out the distractions so we can hear God's voice more clearly.
Right.
And when we do that, when we focus on Christ, it changes the way we see everything else.
It's like putting on a new pair of glasses, right? Suddenly the world looks different, more vibrant, more full of meaning.
I love that analogy. And that shift in perspective leads us to the third element, seeing God's revelation in ordinary life.
Oh, this is where we circle back to those star moments we talked about earlier. So it's not just about grand miracles or dramatic pronouncements. It's about recognizing God's presence in the everyday, the mundane, the seemingly insignificant.
Precisely, it's about training our eyes to see the extraordinary in the ordinary.
But that takes practice, right? I mean, I'm so used to rushing through my day, checking things off my to-do list, that I often miss those subtle moments of beauty and grace.
It's a muscle we have to develop, a habit we have to cultivate.
Right.
One thing that can help is gratitude.
Okay.
When we start to notice and appreciate the good things in our lives, even the small things, it opens our hearts to see God's hand at work in more subtle ways.
So instead of complaining about traffic, maybe I take a moment to appreciate the beautiful sunset, or instead of stressing about a deadline, I thank God for the opportunity to use my skills and talent.
Exactly. It's about shifting our focus from what's wrong to what's right, from what we lack to what we have. And that shift in perspective can be profoundly transformative.
It's like we're training ourselves to see the world through the eyes of faith, recognizing God's fingerprints in every detail.
Yeah.
And that in turn fuels our worship. It's not just about singing songs or saying prayers. It's about living our lives in a state of constant awe and gratitude.
Beautifully said. And as we practice these three elements, trusting in God's provision, focusing on Christ, and seeing his revelation in ordinary life, worship becomes less of a chore and more of a natural overflow of our hearts.
Okay, I'm starting to see how these three elements work together. It's like they create a cycle.
Yeah.
Trusting in God's provision frees us from anxiety and allows us to focus more fully on Christ.
Right.
Focusing on Christ helps us to see the world through his eyes, which leads to recognizing his presence in the everyday. And seeing his presence in the everyday deepens our trust and fuels our worship. It's like a beautiful, interconnected web of faith.
Exactly. And the more we engage in that cycle, the more naturally and authentically worship will flow from our lives.
This is giving me so much to think about. I feel like I'm starting to see worship in a whole new light, not as something we do, but as a way of being, a way of seeing, a way of living.
That's a wonderful way to put it, and that leads us to the final takeaway from this deep dive.
So what's the big takeaway?
The biggest thing is this: true worship isn't about performance or checking boxes. It's about a heartfelt response to the ways God reveals himself to us.
Okay.
Whether that's in those mountaintop moments
Yeah.
or the quiet, ordinary ones.
You know, for me, that's incredibly freeing. I think a lot of us get caught up in the shoulds.
Yeah.
We should sing louder, pray more eloquently, be more devout.
Right.
But what you're saying is that it's really about opening ourselves to God's presence wherever we are, however we are.
Yes.
And letting that encounter shape our response.
Exactly. And that response can take so many forms.
Okay.
It might be expressed through music, through prayer, through acts of service, through creativity,
Right.
through simply being present and attentive
Yeah.
to the beauty of the world around us.
It's like those star moments we keep coming back to. What if, instead of waiting for a lightning bolt from heaven, we started looking for those subtle signs of God's grace in our everyday lives?
Right.
What if we made a conscious effort to notice the good, the beautiful, the true?
That's a powerful challenge. It's so easy to get caught up in the busyness of life, the to-do lists, the anxieties, that we forget to look up and see the wonder that's all around us.
Right.
But those moments of wonder, those glimpses of the divine, are often the very things that draw us closer to God and ignite our hearts with worship.
It's like we're being invited to become treasure hunters,
Yeah.
searching for those hidden gems of grace that are scattered throughout our days.
Yes.
And the more we find, the more our hearts overflow with gratitude and awe.
I love that image. It's not about earning God's favor or proving our worthiness. It's about recognizing the gifts. He's already given us the beauty. He's already woven into the fabric of our lives.
And as we do that, as we cultivate that posture of attentiveness and gratitude, worship becomes less of an obligation and more of a natural outpouring of our love for God.
Beautifully said, it becomes a way of life, a way of seeing, a way of being in the world.
This has been such an inspiring conversation. I feel like I'm walking away with a renewed sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of what it means to truly worship.
I'm so glad to hear that. And remember, it's a journey, not a destination.
Right.
There will be days when we struggle to see the good, when our hearts feel heavy, when worship feels like a distant echo.
Yeah.
But even in those moments, we can trust that God is with us, gently nudging us back towards the light.
That's a comforting thought. It's not about being perfect or having it all figured out. It's about showing up with an open heart, willing to be surprised, willing to be transformed by God's love.
Exactly. And as we do that, as we continue to seek those star moments, in our everyday lives. I have no doubt that our hearts will be filled with the joy and peace that surpasses all understanding.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the heart of worship. We hope you've discovered some new insights that will enrich your own journey of faith. Until next time, keep seeking, keep growing, and keep your heart open to the wonder that awaits.